Hello, and welcome to another episode of Be a Leader podcast, where we talk about current events in sports, military, and business through the lens of leadership. And today we're going to talk about the University of Michigan Athletics Department, specifically what is going on at the University of Michigan. So, reminder, I am a Michigan man, okay? I was part of the basketball program there for 4 years. I ended up becoming the head manager my senior year. I have a varsity letter because I was part of that program. I was working 60 hours a week. There was no rules for me. I loved the program. And me and several of those early managers and players believe we were the beginning foundations that led into an NCAA championship this past year in 2026 under the leadership of Dusty May. And so I have a lot of love for the school. And I even went back to be a graduate assistant coach under Juwan Howard, but my position was cut first week of school. We'll talk just a little bit about that later. But I love the school. I love the sports. I love the athletic department. And so we're going to dive into what has been going on through the lens of just a lot of love and compassion for the school and the program, but we have a lot of things to learn. And the big thing is this article here that came from the Wall Street Journal just a few days ago. You see Jim Harbaugh and Sharon Moore here, but Michigan left out key details in athletic department probe. This is the article that we're going to talk about and what it shows, what things are going on. So it all kind of started with the Sharon Moore scandal with the executive assistant. That's where everything kind of started here. And if you don't remember, he was having an affair with his executive assistant, and they kind of denied it for a while. Everyone kind of knew about it, but it wasn't until the executive assistant finally confessed to the athletic director, Ward Manuel, who fired Sean Moore that day immediately after. And then he went and broke into her place later on with a butter knife at his throat. Saying that he was going to hurt himself. That led to his arrest, so he got to jail. It was just a huge scandal. So in light of what happened with Sharon Moore, the University of Michigan ended up hiring a law firm, Jenner and Block, for $12 million to check into the athletic department to see, is this a one-time incident with Sharon Moore, or is there something else deeper going on in the athletic department there at University of Michigan? Is there something going on with this culture? And what they found was yes. The answer, unfortunately, is yes. There is a bigger problem going on at the University of Michigan Athletic Department, but the University of Michigan itself is denying it. And that is why the article says Michigan left out key details. Okay, that's the problem the founding right here. So let's look at what some of these key detail was. Wall Street Journal had opportunity to actually see the full presentation. And so we're very fortunate that they got to see it for our sake. But let's see some of the key findings that the Wall Street Journal pointed out. So one of them was in 2023, complaints about abusive and unprofessional behavior by a women's water polo coach, Casey Churnside. So the head coach getting a lot of complaints. That was in 2023. In 2024, parents started to complain. There was 2 internal complaints filed and 2 warning letters given to the coach. Coach never got fired, but then resigned in 2026. Recently, what did you see? Okay, Juwan Howard, who I mentioned before, who I went to work for again and was cut first week of school in February 2022. He slapped an assistant coach for Wisconsin at the end of a game in the handshake line, and he was on live TV. And I'll never forget this because I was still living in Ann Arbor. I was just there to work with him, and I was still trying to find a way back home. This is in February, so it was right around the time where I got my offer to work at McKinsey & Company and moved me back to Dallas, Texas. But I saw it live, and I couldn't believe what I saw, and I had to bring my wife over, rewound it a little bit. She saw it, and it was amazing what she said. She said, if you were there, you would have, in front of the whole team in the locker room, you would have yelled and chewed his ass off for stepping out of line and what he did on the court. And then he would have yelled at you for stepping out of line, for speaking to him like that. And then he would have fired you, and you would have been okay with it. I told my wife, I was like, oh, you love me so much and you know me so well. Yes, because that's how I am. I have values. Okay. I have been in pressure situations. I help people with confidence under pressure. And if I see something wrong, I got to call it out. That's part of what I am as a Marine. And there's clearly issues there going on with the basketball team. Okay. And get a load of this. According to the paper, right, on his article, he was suspended and fined for that incident. And the law firm called it a one free punch because he got away with it. They never fired him for putting hands on someone else. Okay. We'll talk about the one free punch here later. Okay. In December 2023, so that happened in February 2022, in December 2023, he had a verbal fight with the coach. in the facilities. And although I know what happened because I'm part of the Michigan family, um, it was never publicly released. So that's as much as I'm going to share about it. But it was mentioned in this article, and that's all I'll share. So he has this verbal fight with another coach. And then he was not fired until the end of the season in 2024 because of the team record of 8-24, 8 wins and 24 losses. Not for his character, not for his behavior, but because of the winning record, he was fired. Okay. And then that leads the article into the football challenges where we have the pictures, right? We can talk about two of the coaches right here. So Jim Harbaugh had two scandals during his time. One was dealing with a staffer accused of stealing signs, opponent signs before games. And then another from a few assistants breaking some of the recruiting rules that were added in place during COVID. So they put like additional rules in COVID for dead periods where you're not supposed to talk to athletes. And apparently there was, and there were several of them, and there was a bunch of issues on that. So that was part of Jim Harbaugh's time. But then it ends up again with Sharon Moore, who was known to, not only was he part of this, we'll talk about a little bit more with the sign stealing, but he was in that mix with the sign stealing scandal and the recruiting violations. But he was also known to be messaging women as an assistant coach, as a married man with two daughters. He was hired anyways, and then he ended up having his own scandal, his own firing, and he was arrested, as I mentioned before. And then the article finishes off with a quote from Coach Biff Poggi, who took over as the interim head coach when Sharon Moore was fired for the bowl game. And he called the University of Michigan a malfunctioning organization and finished off with a quote saying, "I have put Michigan in the rearview mirror, and I'm keeping it there, and I'm glad I'm gone." So these are all really sad things for me to hear from my alma mater, for an organization that spent a lot of sweat equity building within the role that I have. So before I dive into some key points, a few notes I want to emphasize, all right, for those that watch this whole thing. First, even though I don't agree with everything that the athletic director, Ward Manuel, has done, he has treated me with a lot of respect. I've had a few interactions with him when I was there in Ann Arbor, since I've left Ann Arbor. I even did an interview for him when I was teaching a class. That's the irony of all this. I got cut from my graduate assistant coaching job with the basketball team, and so I had to help teach a class titled Coaching and Leadership. The irony there. And I helped teach that class, and I interviewed him for that class, and he came as a guest speaker at that class. I also interviewed for Juwan Howard a long time ago when I still worked for John Beeline. We were doing some promotional materials. I got to interview 4 out of the Fab 5 because Chris Webber was still not allowed during my time there. But I did interview Juwan Howard, and he was very nice to me. He probably just thought I was just another manager cleaning up spills on the floor and handing out water. I don't know what he thought of me. But I mean, he was respectful at the time. I never worked with him. I never officially worked with him. And I don't really know any of these other players in this article. Okay. But what we can do together is learn what is going on. Okay. What is going on and what is the culture that Michigan found itself in. And I say this, and one last note before we go in is, as you may know, I left the University of Michigan working on the basketball team with the desire to build real combat leadership principles from the Marine Corps and then bring them back as a competitive advantage back in college sports. That was the design. Leave college basketball, go in the Marine Corps, and then come back to high-level college sports to be a coach and to use those best principles. And so, although my career has morphed in many different ways, what we see here in this case example is what Michigan athletics and many sports. Okay, many sports. I think about the Dallas Cowboys, like because I'm here in Dallas, is the challenges that sports culture has because they say one thing and they do another thing consistently. And that's where bringing in a lot of the great core values from the military can be extremely helpful. And that's what we're going to do this episode. So I do have 5 points that we're going to cover, but they are in the filter of the 3 core values from the Marine Corps: honor, courage, commitment. I've talked about these before. We're not going to go super in depth of any of those 3, but we will filter them because, again, a high-level sports needs great leadership and culture. Like, they need help in the pressure moments. Talk about it all the time. Pressure is when your identity is really revealed. Okay, and in the Marine Corps and in combat and the military, your identity, you create this very strong identity, is revealed over and over and over again through what you do because the pressure is real. Okay, so let's go to the first one. Let's go to it. We had a lot in this intro. The first lesson, we're going to filter through the lens of honor. Okay, and there's many parts of honor right? Honoring the past, honoring the present, honoring the future. But part of honor is also telling the truth. Okay? And the first lesson here is culture is what you tolerate. It's not what you say. It's not what you state. Okay. And here's the thing. There was a pattern across the sports. Let's just talk about water polo complaints for a second. Water polo, the complaint started in 2023. There was formal warning letters in 2024. Medical staff concerns were ignored that were brought up. It wasn't until a resignation in 2026, not a termination, a resignation. That was water polo. And basketball, Jawan Howard's incident, the slapping incident in 2022, the confrontation in 2023. It wasn't that he was let go till 2024 after an 8-24 record. Okay, they tolerated the bad behavior, they tolerated the bad character, but they did not tolerate the losing record. Okay, so we're seeing here what is being tolerated. That really is what culture is. With football, NCAA findings under Harbaugh, the quote is, ran a program that was largely dismissive of rules compliance. That was the finding. Okay, different sport, different person, but the same institutional pattern. Okay, at some point, you got to stop asking, why is this happening? And start asking, why does this keep happening? Okay, that's a leadership question. Okay, it's not a scandal question, it's a leadership question because we're starting to see a pattern. And that lands on leadership. Leaders set the structure. I talk about this all the time. There's a structure. It's like a little box. A little behavior sits in there. Structure determines the behavior that is tolerated. Okay, and the output is the culture. Okay, it's not what's on the wall, but it's what you do over and over and over and over again. Okay, so what I'm getting to here is that Michigan did not have a broken culture. Okay, it wasn't a culture that was broken. They had a culture. We don't like the culture. Okay, we didn't like the culture. It did not align with what University of Michigan is. University of Michigan is leaders and the best. The athletic department wasn't behaving in that same identity. That's where my IBR framework is: identity, behavior, result. You focus on a very strong identity, match behaviors to that, and the results take care of themselves. But instead, you have University of Michigan being leaders of the best, and then the athletic department is so focused on the result of winning that their behaviors were all over the place. Okay, so again, it's not a broken culture. They had a culture. It's a culture of chaos. It's a culture after chasing after winning, tolerating bad behavior for the sake of winning. Okay, but there was misalignment between what the University of Michigan as an institution stands for and what the athletic department was producing. Okay, so again, we all have cultures. You just got to be able to look in the mirror and say, this is what we have, and it's on me as a leader. It's because of me. I have to own it. If you're gonna change it. Do something about it. Let's move on to lesson number 2. And we're still under honor. Okay. And that is, the truth early is cheaper than the truth late. Another way to say this is bad news doesn't get better over time. So Michigan paid $12 million for this investigation and then released a summary of what was found. Okay. And the summary, and they said that there was no widespread misconduct. Now, there was a full slideshow that the law firm presented to university officials, and it showed more details. And the Wall Street Journal was part of it, as they said on here, and that's the reason why we have this article, right? The truth isn't only broken by wrongdoing. The truth is always also broken when people don't believe they're hearing the whole story. And this is a challenge for now University of Michigan as the institution, because trust was broken within the athletic department, but trust is also being broken by the institution because they're holding on into information. So let's talk about a little bit of a distinction. Honor isn't protecting the reputation of their organization. Reputation. Honor is protecting the integrity of the organization. Reputation, integrity. Sometimes they're the same thing, but sometimes they're not the same thing. Okay, I would argue that integrity trumps reputation every time. Okay, because that keeps the focus on IBR, the identity of the behaviors. You can't control the results that are. Okay, but you can control having a very strong identity and having behaviors that align with it, and the results take care of themselves, as in reputation. Okay, otherwise, controlling the results of the reputation is going to eat you alive. Okay, and some would say it becomes an idol. Okay, you are so focused on that, you do anything to protect that. So the question in this one is, where am I avoiding the truth? That's the question for leaders on this point. Let's move on to point number 3, and now we're moving from honor to courage. And the Marine Corps, we talk about courage, but what's emphasized isn't the courage on the battlefield. It's courage when the pressure isn't as big, right? Standing up for what is right, saying things when they need to be said, having the hard conversation. These are the things that are emphasized for us Marines over and over again under courage. Okay? And point number 3 is the standards only work when they are consistent. Well, yeah, it makes sense. But we have to talk about the investigation's own slideshow labeled the Juwan Howard's 2022 incident as one free punch. Think about that. One free punch. That phrase says everything. Imagine telling your kid, hey, you get one free punch, do whatever you want, but after that you can't do it. Okay? Or your employee, hey, you get one free punch, you can do whatever you want. And then we gotta follow the rules. Or your team, you can have them do whatever you want for one time. Or what about your teenage daughter's boyfriend? You get one free punch, and after that, no. Okay. The lesson isn't about the punch. Okay. It's about what happens to the standard the moment there's an exception to it. Okay. In the Marine Corps, we emphasize standards, right? The standard is the standard. You've got to meet the standard. And it's not because we love rules. Okay. It's because it eliminates favoritism. Right? It honors the past. It protects the future. It supports the mission. It's bigger than the standard or the rule. It's about everything else. That's why we care about the standards. Right? I do not care if you're the starting quarterback, if you're the CEO, top salesman, or the newest hire. Okay? The standards need to apply equally. Okay? Because if it doesn't, then it's not standard. It's a suggestion. Standards are there for a reason. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. Right? And that's why when my wife suggested about Juwan Howard, how I would have ripped him to shreds and then he would have gotten mad at me and fired me, which I believe is true. The irony with this is I went to be a leadership expert as a volunteer, graduate assistant coach, and then told first week of school that my services were not needed. Good luck. Okay? But the irony was, it seems like it was badly needed. It was just ignored. The leadership and good culture was ignored for the sake of winning. That was the irony. So let's move on to point number 4, and we're still under courage. And that is, character problems rarely arrive unexpectedly. Okay. So we're going to talk about Sharon Moore. He was the highest level coach under Jim Harbaugh, associated with the sign stealing scandal and with the recruiting violations. And in his background checks, as he was going to get promoted to the head coach when Jim Harbaugh went to the NFL, it flagged many social media problems and behaviors before it became public. He was messaging OnlyFans actresses and booster people that were wearing scantily clothed and liking a lot of suggestive female stuff. All of that was very public online. And so officials were aware of the pattern well before it became a scandal, well before he ended up having an affair with his executive assistant that he brought in to be his personal executive assistant. When he was told by the athletic director, stay away from her, he was warned while he had the job, and he still did it, right? So here's the thing, right? Leaders often say, hey, nobody could have predicted this, but usually they could. Usually they could. They usually just hope instead of acting. Okay. And hope is not a leadership strategy. I talked about grounded assessments last time. Use evidence to help form your assessments, your stories. And here, here's a lot of evidence that he was a wandering person, that his character was flawed for being a head coach at a program like University of Michigan football team. But they hoped he would change once he got the job. And guess what? He didn't change. It just got worse. Okay. In the Marine Corps, we say, it smells like a duck. It looks like a duck, it acts like a duck, it's probably a duck. Okay. We leaders need to have open eyes and be critical and ask good questions because we should protect the integrity, going back to integrity, of the organization and what we do. So let me take a quick pause on here and explain that this is exactly the type of work I work on with my clients in my Confident Leader Bootcamp. Because usually the hardest part isn't knowing the standard for leaders. Okay, it's actually having the conversations when someone's about to test them, being able to confront people, have confrontation. It's usually really hard for leaders. Right? So my next cohort's starting up in mid-September. And if you've been avoiding hard conversations or you want to build a muscle of confronting problems early, before they get worse and trying to stop hoping things disappear, then this is for you. Okay, more information in the link of this notes. You can also go to my website, danielpinedo.com, to read about it more. But that is part of what we learned in the Confident Leader. So let's go on to lesson number 5. And now we're going to move on from honor, courage to commitment. And commitment is a long-term desire to be committed, consistency, living the standard every single day. And under commitment, we're going to point number 5, and that is winning creates blind spots. So Michigan during this time was excelling. They were doing fantastic. They were winning national championships, Big Ten championships. They had players going to the NBA, going to the NFL, drafted, lottery picks, you name it. The 2023 football national championship was a big, proud moment for Michigan athletics and Michigan fans and alumni across the world. But success and health are not the same. Okay, success is very good at hiding unhealthy culture. Okay, and we see this in business parallels. Sometimes the top salesperson or the rainmaker partner, everyone knows is difficult, but no one touches them because they produce. Right? And this is a phrase that I've heard often in sports and in college basketball. Winning covers a multitude of sins until it doesn't. Commitment isn't championships. Okay? It's not a speech. It's not trying to do one investigation or one slap on the wrist. Okay, it's reinforcing standards every single day, long after the headlines fade. That's what commitment is. Again, you cannot control the outcome. That's why commitment is so important. You cannot control the outcome, but you can control your behavior. So focus on the behavior. Have commitment to the behavior. All right. Otherwise, you are going to compromise yourself for the sake of winning. And that's the question I have for you under this point. What standards have I stopped enforcing consistently? That's the question I leave you on this point. So let's recap the 5 lessons in this episode of Be a Leader podcast. Again, 5 lessons under the 3 core values of the Marine Corps. And let me get my, those watching the video, my college basketball whiteboard to go over these 5 lessons. And the first one is under honor, right? Part of honor is telling the truth. Under honor. First one is culture is what you tolerate, not what you state. Okay, it doesn't matter what you say it is. It's what you do over and over and over again. We saw patterns at the University of Michigan of chaos within the athletic department. And the second one, the truth early is always cheaper than the truth late. And this is a challenge now that the University of Michigan is having itself by trying to say there was no widespread issues, but apparently there was. Okay, tell the truth, be clear. That's you got to rebuild that trust. Now moving over to courage. Part of courage is having hard conversations. Point number 3, standards only work when they are consistent. Okay, they have to be consistent. And point number 4, character problems rarely arrive without warning. There was a lot of warning signs with Shore and Moore. They hoped they would go away. They only got worse. And then after the 3rd core value, commitment, living the standard every day. And under that, we get point number 5, winning creates blind spots. We all have blind spots. When you're winning, it's easy to look away, right? It solves a multitude of sins. And that is not what we should be focused on. Right? We should be committed to the standards, consistency over time. So those are the 5 key points of this episode of Be a Leader podcast. And I want to be honest with you again, I wasn't there. All right. I don't know every single fact. I'm just going off of the stuff that's been publicized in the press, including the Wall Street Journal. And we do know this, right? Every single leader, doesn't matter where you're at, including me, gets tempted to compromise your values. This is an ongoing battle. Okay. That's exactly why the Marine Corps stresses over and over and over honor, courage, and commitment in everything we do. Going to boot camp and officer candidate school, on the fleet, it's written on the walls. We talk about it weekly. We evaluate on it. It's what we do because we have to have that very strong identity, have those behaviors match, and the results take care of themselves. Because again, under pressure, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your lowest level of training. You fall to your standards. And Juwan Howard turns out to be a big bully with an ego when the pressure gets really, really hot. So here are 3 questions for you today. Not for Michigan, but for you. Okay. Honor. Where am I avoiding telling the truth? Courage. What conversation am I avoiding because it's uncomfortable? And commitment. What standards have I stopped enforcing consistently? Those are the big questions. Now, look, every organization is going to drift unless there's someone there helping to steer it, and that's you. Right? Question isn't whether you're leading a university or a business or your own family. The question is, what are you tolerating today that could become your scandal tomorrow? That's what it means to be. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Be a Leader podcast. Please give it a like or a 5-star. Please share it to other people that could benefit from. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What's your biggest takeaway from this episode? What are your thoughts on the scandal at University of Michigan Athletic Department or athletics in college in general? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. And anyways, remember, whether you're leading yourself, leading others, or leading leaders, be a leader. My name is Daniel Pinedo. Thank you, and until next time.